If you can find obscure truths in the world, that is a kind of extraordinary economic power.
They are pretending to be truth tracking while doing other things.
Ding, 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 ding. And it doesn't matter which paradigm that stuff is in because the money is blind. Welcome to the Ideamarket podcast. This is Mike Elias, your host, and I'm joined today by Michael Curzi, a very interesting, brilliant, eclectic guy who I would describe as a post-smart intellectual. And I don't mean that he's stupid. I think if you follow like the kind of intellectual trends on Twitter, there's kind of a lot of crazy avant-garde stuff going on. The term post-smart actually comes from Shlomes, who I had the opportunity to talk to on Curzi's show, Philosophers Playing Flight Simulator. Philosophers on Twitch Playing Flight Simulator, which is my favorite takeoff on Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians and Cars Getting Coffee ever. So I love that project. I love everything that Curzi does. And he's just put out a recent little short film called Habits, which was very interesting and funny. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But we had the pleasure of hanging out in Utah a couple months ago and got some conversation started then. And we probably both have some notes to catch up on. So, Mike, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I love that intro, and I love being post-smart.
It's just my favorite term. So,
yeah,
like I saw that yesterday. I was like, oh man, that is perfect.
Right. Wait, so did you get on audio during the Shlomes stream? Nice.
I did. I talked to Shlomes.
Nice.
It's a crowning achievement of my.
Yeah, he was less of a big deal then. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
because I remember people getting on, but it's also like I think I didn't know your name as well at that time, and it's also like you're playing the game, you're managing the stream, you're talking to commenters. It's like you forget what's going on. So, what's a post-smart intellectual?
Well, all right. So I actually had my first insight about this on that call with Shlomes, appropriately. And it was like something I noticed about the crypto industry is that no one's impressed by intellect. Everyone there is smart. So in order to stand out, smart, like who cares? Your mom thinks you're smart, good for you. And what actually makes things win is when they're fun. So like fun is this kind of transcendent unification of dumb and smart that has like the appeal of the dumbness with the like post consideration of the smartness or something like that. And, just creates this joy. Like nerds, if on a playing field full of nerds, the smart one doesn't stand out. The fun one, the one who can be a nerd and also have a good time and like give people joy is the superstar. And I think there's kind of like an intellectual Twitter sphere breaking out kind of from that kind of feeling that there's a smart that's smarter than smart and it doesn't look like smart.
Yeah, I've had I haven't figured out the right words for it, but I've had this like spiel I've been kind of working on about, which I imagine would come out in like tweets and stuff about like how nerdiness and intellectualism are different. Like nerdiness really has a distinctive like quality, and like it definitely sort of implies like being socially different, socially off in some way. And I've wanted to understand what that's about because I think about like World War II era, like the atomic dudes, and like pocket protectors, right? And there's this sort of like weird, like the jocks and the nerds kind of like ethos that I think is like passed down from that. That's like not totally how people think about things now anymore. Like in terms of like sort of like what are the virtues and what clusters do they come in? What clusters do they not come in? So anyway, that's sort of like what I think of with like smart and fun I don't know what it is with nerds. It's like sort of like smart and like having it together socially or something.
It's like smart maxing or something. Nerds are like the incredibly buff bodybuilders of the mind. Like it's
Right.
not actually the most optimal thing.
Yeah. So what I have a question, which is like, how do our Twitter circles overlap? I think because I'm less in crypto
That's a
than
good
you
question.
is going to be one obvious thing, but there's going to be some.
Totally. I think I can pinpoint the guy through which they overlap. I think it's Rival Voices. We're both kind of like autodidactic psychology, mystical weirdos, and just kind of like putting things into words in a similar kind of way. And he's more like fully committed to that niche than I am. For me, it's always been like a cope, like I feel bad, therefore psychology until I feel better.
Right.
And now that I'm feeling better, it's like I'm not paying as much attention to that, but I still appreciate like the level of insight and honesty that he brings to stuff. And I just like that whole kind of attitude of like chaotic good psychology research.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question, whether psychology should be aimed at like, what is the purpose of it, right? Like, definitely, yeah, I sometimes think about this like, life is for living, and there's something like you do enough psychology to get you back doing something other than psychology. But I also like spend a lot of time in the mental spaces and stuff, and I'm interested in the idea of like a positive ethos for how you spend your mind time, sort of like rather than a negative heal the problem, a positive like attaining something. But yeah, it's just interesting to lay that all out. Yeah, I did interview Rival once. I have one with him called I forgot what it's called. It's about like he's anti saving the world, and oh yeah, it's called The World Does Not Exist. And he was articulating that the world is like a sort of like phantom, like weird abstraction bucket that like something gets put into that's like hiding something else. But yeah.
No, I love that. I wonder if he's referencing like, I don't know if it was Nisargadatta Maharaj or like Ramesh Balsekar, one of those guys who was like, there's no need to save the world you see does not exist. It's just kind of like addressing the futility of identifying core problems. Like whatever you think out there is the core problem is just your core problem. It's just the deepest one you can see in yourself and acknowledge in yourself, and whatever's out there, that's an escape. That's a cope or something.
Yeah,
like that.
I think that can go too far, is my opinion. But there also is probably basically right by default or something.
Yeah. As far as like a positive spin, one of my favorite kind of positive psychology is a shit phrase now, but one of my favorite productive applications of psychology is, and this is already becoming a cliche, like an emphasis on sensations in the body. And your old videos on phenomenology are some of my favorite like explorations of that, because it's really hard to talk about these little subtle subjective experiences. It's almost like ear training in music. Like some people have perfect pitch and can like appreciate fine differences, and some people can't. And for the people that can't immediately, you just kind of have to trust that they're there until you develop the skill. And there's just like this whole universe of evidence collecting that hasn't happened because it's not like instrumentable. It's just felt. Yeah. But anyway, I'm starting to complain now, but I loved your phenomenology videos.
Thank you.
Is what I'm trying to say. And can you maybe explain a little what phenomenology is? Because the phenomenology of the word phenomenology is just atrocious.
Yeah, that's true. It has a mouthfeel, it's kind of got a bounce to it. What is phenomenology? I mean, phenomenology is Now, I don't actually really know the history of the term, and I'm sure it goes back. I know there's the phenomenology of spirit is like used by Hegel, and like quite possibly goes back to Kant, but I don't actually know. That's not the most valuable, interesting way to explain it. But I do find myself interested in what the actual history of the term is, because I don't know if I use the term in the exact most classically philosophically correct way. I do think I use it to describe a thing that is absolutely a natural kind, and that's good enough for me, right? Phenomenology is the stuff of mental experience, and however, that requires a little bit of reframing because you say mental, and people think of thoughts, and thoughts there is a mental experience associated with having a thought. It might be like you imagine like thought bubbles or like a thing going by or like a shape or whatever form. But the stuff of mental experience is, of course, everything we experience, because everything you experience is you're experiencing through the mind. And so you touch a table, you're experiencing the table, but also you're experiencing it through the mind. It's like the mind is the Rand, actually, of all people, has a sort of like sharp framing on all of this, where she basically just talks about the instrument and the thing that's being sensed by the instrument, right? So it's like the mind is this like thing that takes on impressions. And so you get the impression of a table. And so phenomenology, to be a little more direct, okay, so now I've gotten two iterations. First iteration was the history of the term. Second iteration is all of mental experience. The third iteration is like, what are you feeling right now? So it's like, I'm feeling heat in my body because of I'm wearing this sweater that I like, and I'm feeling, and if I look at that heat, I see that it's not just one simple thing. It is a very highly complex, and the sweater's touching my body at different places, and some parts feel hot and some parts don't. Like there's like sort of more like heat in the belly, but not in the solar plexus or something like that. And there's like, I don't want to get too into it, get gross or something like that. But it is very like body stuff, like a little bit of sweat here. Like I'm probably going a little fast because I've been drinking this coffee, and I was sort of like rushing to be on time. And like the cool thing about phenomenology is that you can iterate like crazy. You can go extremely complex and extremely in depth. And I think maybe what's surprising to people and cool to people when they get into it is, one, that it's as rich as it is, though a lot of people will kind of have the sense that it is very rich, but two, that like if you go down the rabbit hole of exploring how very rich it is, cool and weird things happen. And that's a lot of what like things of meditation are for, but other types of introspection as well. I could talk about phenomenology all day. I got even more I could say in that, but that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I won't tempt you. But yeah, I think there's an untapped productivity in that, because we tend to overthink. We tend to think of the mind as like blueprints and nothing else, as like this pure abstraction. But in terms of my own healing, the paying attention to inner sensations and emotions and things like that has been like a huge, almost cornerstone of where the benefits come from. Not trying to over intellectualize. It's how I've escaped rumination and over focusing on thoughts and abstractions. So I just kind of love that exploration, and it's hard to describe. And I encourage anyone to check out your YouTube videos, because it's a 25 minutes that's really well spent.
Yeah, I think that might be my top viewed YouTube videos is that what is phenomenology? I think it's called, which does sort of touch on the media topic, which I don't know what your plan is, but it does get. Yeah,
I'm endeavoring toward planlessness.
Right.
So if you feel an impulse, let's follow.
Well, I feel like a good frame might be like, okay, so we're doing this podcast because like there's you hit me up to do it, but I also feel like there's some kind of like contact point of like interest or like, so I wonder like what's the crux? Like what is generative that like makes us think having a conversation would be would be good. So we've chatted before about like some topics, and like that could be like we could recap a little, or I don't know.
Yeah. So okay, so here's a couple of initial thoughts on that. One is when I asked, or actually when you volunteered, like what you're doing, what your focus is, you used a phrase that I love, which was spiritual infrastructure. And one thing that I've been, realizing is that infrastructure is kind of inextricably spiritual. Like the things that we rely on and the assumptions that we make and the structures that are built into the world that we expect to be there and bear loads of different kinds cannot help but have moral implications and goadings and statements embedded in them. And I feel like Rome has the same thing in their design philosophy, and if you personally have the same thing in your design philosophy, I think that's kind of a fruitful place to start, because as we were talking about, the world you see does not exist, and like there's this futility in discovering root causes. But I think infrastructure is so unnoticed that it can impute messages without any kind of resistance, and it's a really high leverage thing to play with if you want to bake a message into the world.
Yes. Sweet. So I'll briefly recap, not to spend this whole time shilling my videos, but I'm going to do a little bit of it. Actually, the first video I put on YouTube in the current, maybe first period, was back during the pandemic, lockdown, living at my parents' house. And it's called What I Learned at the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives being in Jerusalem, that, this like across the way or whatever. They've got all these churches, and I had a free day when I was there because I got kicked out of the place I was staying from the girl that I pissed off. And I was like, well, I'm going to visit some churches. And I was noticing that they were all beautiful, but in different ways, right? They had different art, right? There's different vibe. There's the like florid, like, paintings on the ceiling, like all the different iconography, and there's like the gold and stuff in like one. And then in another one, it's simpler and humbler, and the walls are white, and like the pews are wood, and there's like a couple colors going on, and it's like, the light coming in. And it's like interesting, right? Because it's possible that there's like different sub-denominations of like something going on, but it's also the case that to a first pass, the religion is the same, but the vibe is different. What does that mean? And I noticed, because I would sit in there and I would like meditate, because this is just a thing I've been into for a long time. And I'd like feel the space, and I'd be like, damn, they're different. They just like feel like different places. And so, spaces are one example, right? Where like spaces are a thing that draw an experience out of you. They reflect something back to you. And I think we like sort of, not to sound too woo, but like get into like resonant states with spaces. Right. And it's like we mimic them. And also we shape them to like how we feel like we are. And this is so spaces are one example where it's like very visible, because it's like, you walk in and you're like, this place looks different from that place. But you can look at the whole world of physical space that way. And like, you've got built, I used to be a kind of hardcore libertarian, and then I no longer am. But one thing that I noticed was that in Seattle, they banned billboards. And I noticed that I liked that. And I liked being in Seattle more because there's no fucking billboards. And there's just like a little bit of like, stepping off the ultra hardcore ANCAP, like, reservation or whatever, with like things like that. And it's like, you start to wonder, like, what is the spiritual state of mankind? What is the state of the people in a city when there's billboards and when there's not? We talk about beauty, but a lot of times we talk about beauty like a consumptive thing, like, oh, I like beauty, I want it around me. I don't like ugliness, I don't want that around me. But it's also like, what if it's more than just pleasantness, right? What if it is highly significant for what we're like. And so so anyway, when I talk about the spiritual infrastructure, like that's one side of it. It's like, how do the things that we interact with of any type, and and you mentioned Rome. It's like whether it's one conversation Connor and I had was about he told me about Brett Victor's, what is it, the humane representation of thought, and it's this really incredible talk. It's on YouTube, and he's just talking about how thoughts require a medium of expression, but the medium may be more or less tuned to the thought. And if it's not tuned to the thought, and you try to express the thought in the medium that is not suited, it's like putting the thought in a cage and treating it inhumanely. However, but if it is like the medium that is suitable for the thought, it like helps it to grow and like live right in this way that it should. And so I was super intrigued by that. I did love that video, and I do think it's really worth checking out that talk. And so which is just to say, like you said, it's like I think people come at this from different angles, and mine has been sort of like in spiritual aesthetic stuff is like what got me thinking about it. And so, yeah, I've got thoughts also on like, atomization, like modern era of atomization being a time when people are disoriented in part because they're disconnected, and spiritual infrastructure would be about setting up the reestablishing the possibility of orientation for people to just feel like they know what the hell's going on, which is, I would describe myself as growing, I don't think that I'm dumber than most people. I think I'm pretty smart or whatever, but also I feel extremely confused. And I feel like I've always felt extremely confused. Like I don't know what the hell is going on. And some of what helps me orient is things that have been spiritual infrastructure for me. Right. And so I think that's part of what I'm trying to contribute to.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. What we're experiencing the breakdown of, and I guess the new birth of is the spiritual infrastructure of the past in a lot of ways. That like the concept of modernity and progress has reached such a pace that we're not experiencing the same level of solidity in any kind of institution or worldview as previous generations did, just kind of out of necessity. And that's interesting. Like, how do you solve for that in a spiritual way, let alone the very, the practical problems?
Yeah.
How do you, give people a human level of coherence?
Yeah. I part of what's fascinating to me is like, this actually connects back to what you were talking about at the beginning, sort of with like the idea of post-smart. It's like, having good ideas is sort of like no longer the whole game. We want to interact with people that we enjoy interacting with. And it's sort of that there's like a shift in the ethos. I'm reading this book right now called Virtue Politics by James Hankins, which is about the Italian Renaissance. And his part of his theory essentially is that, or his description of like what went down is that basically a bunch of people got together and assembled under a new spiritual ethos, right? And saying that like we want people to be virtuous, and virtue means a certain thing, and the virtuous people will be eloquent, and the virtues will be these things that were studied by in the classical world. And they found a way to make it compatible with Christianity, because previous Christians had been like, hating on the pagan stuff, understandably, because it was the thing previous to them. I was reading a little bit of Augustine. He starts shitting on the classic authors, and I'm like, no, don't make me disagree with you. Like, but yeah. So, but in the Renaissance era, it's sort of like people looking around post-pandemic, or sort of contemporaneous with a major pandemic and all kinds of like death and mayhem, and they're saying there's corruption, there's confusion, like we. There's war, there's cruelty, and how can we like assemble under a different spiritual direction, right? And so connecting it to like Twitter, basically, which I think is not actually a stretch. Like it may seem like too much, but I'm a hardliner on like we live in history and like now's the time. And it's interesting with Twitter because I started out as like, it's funny because I tweet under my real name, but I want to say that I started out as a face poster, meaning but that's more of a vibe than anything else. I did have my face as my picture. Now it's Keanu Reeves, which I guess does signal a change in direction.
I just noticed.
The number of people who like think that's me is actually high, which is so weird to me. I think profile pictures are like the what do you call it? The heraldry of the modern man.
Yeah.
Right. Like these symbols.
I do want to ask you about profile picture physiology.
Yeah.
Like, break down the spectrum here at some point.
Well, basically, really quick, like I used to be like more rather than post smart, more just like a smart poster, and that's okay. And there's I follow some smart posters, but it started feeling over time more and more natural to like fuck around. Right. But it also, if I'm fucking around too much, I don't like that either. Like if I'm just making jokes, if they're really good jokes, I'm okay kind of just making jokes for a bit. But I also want to bring it back to like the spiritual stuff and the intellectual stuff and like, let's change something. So like I'm trying desperately for some kind of synthesis between these things that like come out of me. But anyway, what I was trying to say is that my thoughts are coming out a little jumbled today. It's like there's an ethos to this part of Twitter, which is like what am I trying to say? It sort of seems to disdain like the old guard a little bit. It's like sometimes you see it in disdain of like blue checks, right? But also often disdain of like something like being too earnest, which I don't wholly agree with, but I don't wholly disagree with either. It's just interesting to me. And so anyway, yeah, I mean, I don't know if movements is exactly the right term, but it's something like these like scenes. And I think weirdly almost seems autonomously, though it does come about as the result of the deliberate effort of people, seem to like assemble a new ethos when the old thing isn't working. So this is how I was trying to kind of answer, like, what do you do when people are atomized and disoriented? Partially, I think like scenes and groups like come up with a new vibe and they're like, we're this now. And it creates some kind of context for them. And Twitter's been cool because it's happening remotely, and that's fairly new, world historically speaking.
It makes sense that Twitter has this kind of primordial ooze kind of a feeling that groups and the memes and vibes that tie them together can shift just at will. There's not like institutions that have to change their name and raise money for different people and stuff like that. It's very kind of freeform. Yeah, that makes perfect sense that in the absence of, well, when you need to iterate your orientation quickly, to use a medium that is kind of vibe based and kind of more liquid in that way, would allow for that. I love Twitter for that.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing.
And I wonder if Twitter is vibe based or if it's that the people we interact with a lot on Twitter are vibe based. You know what I mean? Because like, I don't know, people use it really differently. And I'm often amazed. First of all, I'm often amazed that people will totally lurk and just use Twitter in consuming mode, which is, I'm not saying that judgmentally, but it actually is like a little confusing to me. I used to do it a little bit back before I joined. And I kind of more like followed like funny accounts and like news-ish stuff. And I get, but yeah, I don't know. I wonder how much it's medium based or cultural, the sort of like vibing being the sort of driver.
It could very well be cultural. I keep myself in a bubble by design. I've a bubble of different weird groups, and make no claim to understand Twitter as a whole.
Yeah, it's a million different things. It's just crazy how I love now and then peeking into some scene that's completely alien to me that I have nothing to do with, and just being like, man, they have their drama and their memes and like their like people that everyone knows. Like, yeah.
Totally. To bring it back to spiritual infrastructure just a
Yeah.
little bit, when you were describing the amount of olives and the way spaces shape
Yeah.
things, I was reminded of something that my dad and I have talked about. I come from a classical music family, and my dad has got a musicology degree and all that stuff. And something that has always bugged him is that when there's like a a rough neighborhood or something, and there's a bus station, so like people have to go there, but it's in a rough neighborhood. Like in order to keep the gangs away, they will play classical music
Hmm.
out like over the loudspeakers and just create this vibe that is peaceful and lovely, but the intention is actually a kind of violence
Mm-hmm.
repellent. Like if you're trying to be cool and edgy and like have a
Mm-hmm.
gun, you're not going to sit there listening to Beethoven for too long. It's just not going to feel right to you.
Though the gangster who would love the Beethoven, now that's a character. Now that I want to, yeah,
Right?
there's something. Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's something there.
That would be cool. That would be cool.
Is he
And
saying the
like,
city does that in somewhere?
yeah, I can actually, I mean, I don't know how widespread
Right.
this is, but I can say for a fact that that's what the Santa Cruz bus station
Uh-huh.
does on the Front Street
Right.
strip. It's like one of the the big bus station downtown, and there's gangs. It's a little city,
Right.
and they have classical music playing 24/7. And so that's in the sense of setting the vibe in a way that could be like positive. It's also kind of this um, defensive or repulsive
Mm.
or like go away kind of a thing, which is weird. It's kind of I can't tell if it's an inversion of that or not. It's kind of related to Muzak.
Mm.
Like you walk in, you don't pay attention, but you get excited and buy things. A ton of research done
Mm-hmm.
on that, and then I'm reminded of a quote I don't remember from whom, but it said, "You can tell what a society worships by what its biggest buildings are
Mm-hmm.
about." Like you go to a quaint European village and they've got a giant cathedral and they've got like, only 40,000 people living there. Or you go to Los Angeles and the tallest building in the dead center is the US Bank
Right.
building. And just, I'm kind of just listing examples of spiritual
Right.
infrastructure that, can be thrown into that category.
Yeah. I mean, it relates in part to a totally different angle on it is psychic warfare.
Yeah, bring it on.
Like you're saying with the classical music example, it's like, it's like a beautiful thing used in at least a strange purpose, at least a non-standard purpose. You know, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about what ideas have cultural supremacy and how that expresses itself. And so I think when you're talking about culture and spirit, you have to try to be attentive to intangible things, but it's hard also because intangible things being less obvious, not only harder to see, but like it's harder to confuse. It's easier to confuse yourself. And so noting that it's a confusing area, full stop, you can still try to look at things like what you're saying, right? It's like, what's the biggest building? And it's like the building is extremely visible. It's huge, but that is a cultural expression of the society is an indirect thing. That's an interpretation. That's like a lens, right? And I think it's a good one, right? And so, yeah, the cultural question is like, what do we believe? Who are we? And do we make beautiful things? Do we make ugly things? Should we make beautiful or ugly things? I my sister told me a quote, and I don't remember who it's by, but the quote is to the tune of, the purpose of art is to the purpose of art is to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. That's the line, which is kind of awesome. It is kind of awesome, right? And, disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And that's interesting. And, disturb the comfortable. It's like, yeah, you see some real shit in art and you're like, that hit me and I didn't expect it to. I was a kid, I saw a version of Medea and I lost it. It was terrifying. This woman was on stage screaming and her hands are covered in blood and the stage lights were red. It's just holy fuck. This is Medea. I mean, it's a great way to do that story. And, that disturbed me, right? I think to my benefit. Also, to comfort the disturbed, right? Few of us feel truly understood by everyone in our lives, or and some of us are lucky enough to have people we're close to where we feel somewhat understood, et cetera. But also there's a lot of isolation. It's hard to convey stuff. Now and then you'll see some art and it reflects something back and you're that actually resonates with me more than anything else I've seen or any person has been able to. And I think those are purposes of art. But I'm are those the only purposes of art? There's sort of something about that where it's very focused on this disturbedness, right? It's the comfort of the unwell and the sort of shaking up of the too comfortable. I don't know. But to me, it can get a little bit political. I think in our current world, a lot of times we tend to think of art, if it's not commercial, as being revolutionary, and it kind of has a sort of leftist vibe to it. The sort of caricature of it would be a little bit like Banksy or something like that, but also there's a lot of lenses and many are valid and interesting, but it's of feminist art or queer art or Marxist, et cetera. And there's different lenses on art. And you often get a sense that this is what it's all about. I try to remember that for the complete opposite side of the spectrum, that Virgil made the Aeneid because he was hanging out in Emperor Augustus's social circle, and he kind of puts Augustus in the story, and it's that is not a revolutionary in that sense. That is not counter power. That is a celebration of Rome for Rome's top dude, the goat himself, Emperor Augustus. So it's anyway, where was I? What was this? We're talking about that quote for art. We're talking about the purpose of art.
Comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, and how that, it seems that's not the be all and end all. What about just pretty? And what about
there's I think the reason that I brought that up was because I was saying do we make things that are beautiful or not? It's easy to say that in many ways we don't. Also, in many ways we do. But there's still this question of should we? Maybe making ugly things can be good, and I think it can be good, right? I don't want to have a closed off attitude to any of this. But what type of ugliness? I remember explaining to somebody a while ago that there's cool problems to have, and there's uncool problems to have, and it's it's cool problems to have. It's he's so different and alone, but in a cool way, right? Uncool problems to have. It's he has dandruff and or he doesn't know, he always makes people hate him or something just because he says the wrong things or something and they're less cool. And so I think there's sort of cool ugliness and uncool ugliness. And cool ugliness is I think of Rodin as maybe my favorite sculptor, and he's got this amazing the three fates, I think is what it's called, and it's these three figures standing with their necks all stretched and kind of horrible above the gates of hell.
I'm gonna Google that right now.
I think it's the fates.
Okay, three shades.
Probably. Is it three dudes?
And their heads they're kind of all
the three shades.
pointing to the
Yes.
center.
So
Yeah.
that was actually made for one of the coolest works of all time that was not finished by the sculptor. I think was ended up being cast by like his son or something like that, which was going to be like a fucking like 20-foot tall, The Gates of Hell. And it's like very Miltonian. It's very like angels and demons and like these epic, you like imagine the gates of hell, right? And it's got that, in Latin, what is it? Abandon all hope, you enter here. And above that sign are the shades, all shade-like, kind of pointing down at it. Anyway, that's my image of like cool ugliness, right? It's like sick. But there's also uncool ugliness, and it's like some really, I don't know what the term is for sort of like this kind of art is like. Anyway, you'll see that too, and it's like, I don't know. What should we be making? I don't have the answer. I want to have more answers about what should we make?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's just that we should express. Well, that's a whole thing. I don't think it's just that we should express ourselves. Actually, that's not my opinion. Yeah.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. Like, if well, I can't help but look for a kind of a teleology. Like, what's the goal? If we're trying to accomplish something by talking about stuff, we're trying to accomplish something by doing stuff, we're trying to accomplish something by meditating, we're trying to accomplish something by making art. Our effectiveness depends on what the goal is. That art is just another kind of speech, another kind of work, another kind of meditation, kind of all wrapped into one.
Yeah. It's I definitely have a bit of criticism. It's like, I believe that art that I make will have the flaws that I have. That's my view. And I think I have many flaws.
Sure.
And I'm leery of any view on artists that would not pay attention to the fact that artists are flawed people, right? And just because artists are people, and that's how it is. And there's often, I think, a lot. I can't know this for sure because it's like I didn't go to art school and like I don't know about these scenes and circles. It's like I'm not like participating in that really, but it's like the vibe you get a lot of times is that there's this focus on craft, which I think can be good, but also sometimes there isn't even a focus on craft. It's like you don't even have to learn how to paint. You just like make something. And then there's maybe a focus on honesty. And I think that a focus on honesty is required for someone who wants to get something good out of themselves. But also, I think I find that when I express something honestly, that I often want to change. And it's like I get it out and it's like good and like something happens just by fact of me getting something out of myself. And also I'm on a quest and I see the flaws in everything I did and I see my flaws and I want to be fucking glorious. And I want my art to be too, I want anything I make to be right. Like whatever the form is. So yeah, it's like good art maybe is not just self-expression. I think it's like the expression, the honest expression of like good people. I don't know. That sounds kind of weird and is misinterpretable, but that might kind of be my opinion.
Yeah, no, I got you. That's I want to ask about your creative process and what kind of lessons you've been learning lately, because
Right.
I've been going through some too.
Yeah. What are you going through it with? If I may ask.
Guitar. Yeah, I'm going through with music. Like, I felt kind of alienated from my musical life for a long time, and just recently have been getting it back, and it's been awesome. And I'm going from this transition right now where I realized a lot of the guitar playing I was doing was just to convince myself that I'm good and give myself like, oh, look how good you are. Look how cool you are. It was like very narcissistic. And I didn't really have anything particular to say that was like unique or something like that. It was just how well can I imitate my heroes to myself as the audience, And I've been letting go of that and just trying to follow the crazy and see what's in there and wants to come out. and been practicing buying some crazy clothes. I'm wearing a Looney Tunes paisley
Beautiful,
vest from
yeah.
Bangladesh, and like this is the hand-me-down designer jacket that I bought in Pasadena. Like I'm trying to mix it up a little bit, and it's been I'm just starting to learn all the things that that art requires, that honest expression requires, and I'm just interested in what your journey's been like recently.
Yeah, I kind of envy you that, because I think I've done a lot of music in my life, but I think I've never been good enough to get to a point where it's like felt like a really natural expression of me, I guess. It's like I think I got good enough to now and then be able to play something that sounded good, and then also be in the vibe of that in like a way that was good. But yeah, no, I'm just noting that it's good. I think I do want to attain that with music at some point. My process is to try to make cooler and cooler stuff. Period. I try to make stuff that's cooler than what I made before. Is one part.
What's cool? How does cool work?
When you see it, what's cool?
I'm asking as a nerd who's trying to reform, gratefully recovering nerd.
Part of it is I have learned to open myself up to getting hyped about stuff in order to detect what's cool. Like, you got to be willing to be like, fuck, that is sick at something in order to, it's useful, because then you can notice yourself reacting and you're like, yeah, like, you may know that I'm obsessed with Kanye West. And I've watched videos of him mixing music, and he's like got his headphones on and he's like rocking in his chair, right? And he's like making music, and you're like, all right, whatever. It's like the rapper's like rocking out to his music. Okay, that's an understandable thing. But I was like, why am I not doing that? Like, why am I not like rocking out when I make my stuff? And I kind of like tried it. It's like I kind of just like I was like listening to music like while I'm like editing, and it really fucking helps. It's like so yeah, the one I just released called Habits like has a lot of like cuts, right? And it's like when I rewatch it, I'm like, oh, I could have done this like one frame differently. Like there's like a couple things, because nailing the rhythm, like having that just fucking like dance, I think that's sort of my like fireworks. When I make stuff, it's like, okay, there's a complex spiritual message, but like also for some fucking reason, the human body loves to witness good cuts with music, and that's just a fact. And it's sort of like that's like the gravy, that's the like, you know what I mean? And so it's just sort of like what's cool. If I start getting hyped, I start. That's like the whole signal for me. So with Habits again, for example, I don't think it's like the greatest thing ever made. It might be the best thing I've made. There's like maybe two other things that are in contention, but nevertheless, for weeks I've just been thinking I need a way to film in the car, and I didn't know why I was thinking that. I was just kept thinking about it would be cool if I could film in the car, and I'd be driving and I was thinking about stuff, and I was like, I wish I had a camera, like, and it's like that just kept coming up, and that's the signal. I think a lot of it is like it's sort of like your spirit knows. You gotta like let it talk. You know what I mean? And so Habits started out as basically like a video demo. Like I just finally got the setup to put the camera in the car, and I started filming myself in the car, and I thought, oh, I could just do all this funny shit in the car. Like, okay. And then I got all that footage, and I didn't really know what arc to give it at that point, right? But that was like enough to like, then it was a few days basically from done at that point, like once I actually was filming it. So I probably could have saved several weeks if I had figured out the car filming earlier. But at the time I was like, oh, well, this might just be a nice to have, not a need to have. I don't know. I like a lot of things, so maybe this isn't it. That's kind of how I try to figure out what's cool.
All right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that. why aren't I jamming to my own stuff? Why aren't I like getting hyped over my own stuff? I think that's awesome. It reminds me of something that I don't know if it was Steven Tyler or someone said that you are your first audience. So if you like something that you're doing, there's going to be people out there who are like you and also like what you're doing.
Yeah, I think you have to be it's your taste, right? You're making something according to your taste. You're assessing what you're making, and you're making adjustments based on like your sense of what's good. And this is part of how I see it as a spiritual practice. It's like you are to be a detector of the good, and you're going to craft some physical reality, whether it's a song or a video or a play or like whatever else it is. You're going to shape it to itself, have the good that you see. It's like you see it mentally. You got to put it in this thing so that it can reflect it mentally. And then I think that's beautiful. When that works, it's like the most beautiful thing. And this is sort of why I get so hyped about like the Renaissance. It's like maybe far enough back in history that you can idealize it, and then you're just like, but also the stuff is great. It's like Sistine Chapel. It's just like God, like that's just like screams God, or if it doesn't scream it like plays a symphony or whatever, and it's just awesome. And that I think is what's like beautiful. It's sort of like imbuing things with spirit. It's kind of shamanic, something like that. Or I don't know if you're putting the spirit into it or letting the spirit out of it or what it is. That's that Michelangelo line, well, the man in the marble. Like I had to find the man in the marble. Right?
Yeah, totally. But like whether the spirit is being put in or let out or something like that, there's definitely like a resonance. There's a resonance that's created either way. So if we go about, building infrastructure that doesn't, without like the intentionality about what it evokes and resonates with, then that's open to being hijacked by sinister forces that do think about that, or it'll just be a graveyard and it'll have no like soul in it and no life affirming qualities of some kind. I'm trying. I don't want to give away spoilers of habits because it's so short that people can just like crank through it. I might even like attach it to the end of this podcast so that if people are watching on YouTube, they can just like keep it going. Are you open to sharing some of the spiritual messaging that you intended to embed in there for nerds who can't read between the lines?
Right. Well, in part, if someone can't read between the lines, it's my fault. Okay, maybe let me tweak that. I guess there are people who really can't get a sense of anything, but also it is on me.
I definitely I overring everything. I go, oh, that last scene, is that nothing? Is that is that
right?
Finally reaching?
Yeah. I mean, if anyone is curious, I do recommend you watch it. So if you want to watch it with fresh eyes, I don't know, pause the video and do that now. But
it's Michael's pinned tweet, by the way. So just go to twitter.com/Michael Curzi, and then it'll be the pinned tweet. All right.
But if you're listening to this, 100 years or more into the future,
in 3,000,
it may not still be my pinned tweet, but I hope you can find it somewhere. I will have made efforts to put my content somewhere that is readable with future technology. That is true. I'm going to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
So what's the message? I mean, so there was a different version of habits that I didn't make. And I actually, part of I'm trying to learn what my process is or should be, and I'm improving it as I go, you know what I mean, for like making this stuff. And part of it is I show people drafts and I get their opinions, and right, so most by default, I don't agree with a lot of things people say, but like, the first version was kind of like it. So basically the way it came to being is I got all this footage of me in a car and I kind of like edited that together. And then I randomly woke up at like 4:30 in the morning and I just started like filming some stuff of like me making tea and like scrolling Twitter. And I like slap that on the beginning. So, right. So there's this sort of like intro where I'm like kind of getting up and like whatever. And then I had this thing where it was sort of, there's this, and I put in the music, I found the music I wanted to use, and sort of like there's this ramp up, and now we're in the car, and then I showed this to my cellian mage who's living here, and he said, he basically was like, it needs something, it needs some kind of arc, because it kind of like, it's moving, it's going somewhere, and then you're just in this car, and then what, right? And I, like, he was definitely right. I didn't think it was done, but I didn't know where I was going, and so like that feedback was kind of helpful. And so I ended up putting an ending on, which was basically the mega car crash, like a flipping crazy car crash thing, right? And there's sort of like, you could have a different version of habits, which is a little bit rather than not necessarily nihilistic, but kind of like edgy or like the dark ending or something like that, is the person who doesn't exit the loop, right? So I think part of basically how I would say that it's about, it's like the truth, which is that I struggle with my habits, right? And it's like, I may not literally be stuffing my face with cake while drinking Monster and smoking a cigarette, but like I've done things that are worse than that. Like that's what it's about, right? And I think the car thing, like, started as just like, this would be cool, but it's also like, our habits are consequential. What we do fucking matters. Like, your life is on the line. Like, that is your everyday, what you do, that is your life, right? And it's like, you spend it a second at a time, a minute at a time, an hour at a time, a day at a time. And like these habits can suck you into the mud, or they can support your life, right? And so basically, I then, yeah, from my sister, got some good feedback on it. It was like that the ending sort of like could be different, or like, what do we need? And so that's how I end up with this kind of like slower, like pause, turn down the music, change the vibe. Like, how else could this be? Finally get out of the car, and because what's this line from Emerson where he says, like, to the critic, we surrender the past and we hope anyway. And he's talking about how, the critic is saying, like, you have failed so many times. Your whole life has been mundane and confused. And Emerson says, to the critic, we surrender the past and hope anyway. And this is how I feel about the habits. It's like, I'm proud of some of my habits, and I've done some cool things, and I've like whatever, but I've also backslid and all this stuff. And so I look at the past, and whatever things I'm proud of, there's lots I don't want to continue. And so to the critic, whoever that may be, I surrender the past and hope anyway. And I think that's kind of like what we're trying to do, when we try to improve how we live.
Yeah. I think that's cool. And I think you could also make the case that habits are a kind of spiritual infrastructure for like personal
100%.
flourishing.
Yeah, I had a thread where I was talking about, like, if I made my life philosophy into an art, like some kind of game, what would the game be? And the quick version is basically, you win if you take normal good actions. Normal good actions. A normal action is like, you don't have a job, you look for a job. You submit your resume, you call people, you want to express yourself, you experiment with that. You want to date somebody, ask people out. Those are normal good actions, right? You're confused about an important problem, you think it through, you break it down into steps, you ask for advice. These are just normal good things, okay? You win, and your victory is guaranteed if you take normal actions. However, you have despair, right? So I imagine there being like a meter, or like it's like a character trait. It's like your despair level, right? Despair causes you to be less able to take good actions, basically. And so you've got your day, and your perfect day, you'd wake up and you'd crank out your 14 hours of good actions, but despair gets you. More or less, you could have a great day of like kicking ass and just taking deliberate steps to improve your life, but instead you like get taken out for 3 hours, and you're just like confused for half of the time, or you don't know what you're doing, or you start feeling bad, or you like start just eating food or some shit, and the food fucks with you. Okay, then that means that the game is, you want to reduce your total despair level, right? And the way you do it is by improving your habits. So in this game, And so the idea is that bad habits and bad life events can increase your despair, but the lower your total despair, the better you react to bad life events, the more likely you are to have, like, I think they call it traumatic growth. Something bad happens and it makes you stronger rather than making you weaker. But these things can make you weaker, right? And so there's a bit of the Matthew principle? It's Matthew? I don't remember if it's Matthew. To he who has,
I don't know the.
to he who has more shall be given. To he who has not, what little he has shall be taken away. And so it's sort of about it kind of like a tower defense game. It's like you need to beat the waves, and you need to be like strong enough to survive the tide so that you get the upward spiral rather than the negative one. And anyway, but habits are the basis of it. It's like basically if you add permanent habits, then they start to detract from your total despair level because they improve you. Like you lift, you're physiologically doing better. You get sun, it's like your hormones are working better. Like you go for a walk and like you feel good. That all makes your body work differently, and like you're just less likely to succumb to bad stuff. That's kind of how I see it. Anyway, that's my life philosophy.
That's cool. No, I like it. I'm imagining it sort of like Snakes and Ladders. I think the traumatic. I mean, I feel like my life is kind of like Snakes and Ladders too, so I'm kind of projecting that. But like, if it's almost like you have a traumatic experience, and if your despair is low enough, it's a ladder, and if it's too high, then it's a chute. Chutes and ladders, not snakes and ladders. Fucking snakes and ladders. Chutes and ladders, where either you like slide down to an earlier point or you ascend to a higher point. That's cool. That's cool, and it's actually. It sounds quite related to the question that I asked you in Utah, which is if you had to design like a course or a boot camp to turn people into you, or to like impute people with your unique perspective, what would the curriculum be, or what would the boot camp look like? And I think if you put it in a game and just like make people get good at it, I think that's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, and I wonder what is the track record of things like video games for improving people. Like where it's been attempted, in some places it hasn't been attempted. They're just like, we're going to make a fun game and make money. I want to know, like, how many times has it been deliberately attempted to like, we're going to just like help people be better people by making a game that like transmits concepts,
Well, I mean, if there are two kinds of games that come to mind for me, and I'm not a video game expert at all, except for the kind of expert you become when you're 11. And what comes to mind there are games that are specifically designed around logic for children, like the Zumbinis. Do you know the Zumbinis?
Do I?
You think, like, kind of guy. We talked about this, didn't we? Yes. All right. So like, loved that as a kid. I keep a meme of Arno the Pizza Troll on my phone just in case I need to send it to anybody. And the other kind of game is like Roller Coaster Tycoon or Kerbal Space Program, where you're like building. There's like a lot of creativity and a lot
building
of
systems,
like stuff going on. Yes, building systems, exactly. And they're like, there can be something really satisfying.
Yeah, there's also, I think, people have made games that teach you how to code, and I think maybe some of those I haven't done them, but like maybe some of those are good. Something that gives you a real skill. I mean, that's great. It's good. It's wholesome.
But are you talking more about like a character thing, like courage or something hard like that? Soft hard?
And I guess anything. Yeah. Like, like what's a game that's like really fundamentally wholesome? I might ask Twitter that question just to see, like,
maybe chess.
You said chess.
Chess? Maybe chess. Well, it's based on war, so it's not that wholesome in that respect. But like the strategy,
strategy stuff is cool.
It's an intellectual thing. Yeah.
Interesting question. I mean, what would I do to turn somebody into me? That I think it would be in some ways an unpleasant experience, but
boot camp often is an unpleasant experience. It is not known for its pleasantness.
I was thinking about this the other day because like I started off as I was a really kind of weirdly hardcore adolescent, and I think a lot of guys will relate to this. And I don't actually know what women will think, or I don't have any comment on that, but no, whatever. All kinds of people might relate to it. But for me, it took on this really like physical form. It's just like doing karate all the time and like working out all the time and like just doing like before I had any notion of like you can hurt yourself working out, I would just like do stupid, crazy stuff. I was reading this samurai philosophy stuff all the time, and it's like, to die without achieving your aim is a dog's death, but there's no dishonor in that, and that like fanaticism is a good thing. And, like, the way of the samurai is found in death. And it's like all these stories about like, Yagyu Munenori, Muniyoshi or Munenori, taught his son, the other one, to sword fight by making him trudge in the snow for 6 hours a day until he couldn't walk. And it's like insane shit that doesn't make any sense. Like what is trudging in the snow going to do? But just kind of build character. So I kind of put myself through a like my own kind of like Sith Lord, kind of vibe, like just trying to like become hardcore. Because like I just really believed that like being hardcore was important, and I didn't like being afraid. And I just believe that some kind of intensity would help me not be afraid. Basically, it's like when I'm 12 to 14 or something, then through 16 or whatever. So that's kind of like how the kind of spirituality helped me out, like as a kid, because it's like I found these samurai books, and they just like helped me deal with shit, and I dealt with shit in the weirdest way, and I don't want to do that stuff again. It's like I work out now, but it's like I don't want to fucking like die, like but I don't know. Part of me is like I should just go back to it. I should go to like do the Navy SEAL mode of like at least the version that I would actually do, or something like that, because there's something I was getting out of it. So that would be part of how I'd make a clone of me. But I don't know how people respond to that either. But it is like important to me,
Yeah, I had no idea. And man, on the list of like influences and hobbies a 12 to 16-year-old can have, I think, that's relatively constructive.
Relatively. I think it made me a little crazy too. But I think, I don't regret it. I don't regret it.
Yeah. I'm a little curious. Are you familiar with the Enneagram, like personality typing?
Not super familiar, but vaguely familiar.
Okay. My wife and I have been getting into it a lot lately, so I'm wondering if you know your type. I've been thinking you were a 4 because, reasons, but maybe you're a 3 because
I think I've gotten 8 before, but is that the
Connor's an 8.
Yeah. I think I've gotten that before. What are 4 and 3? I don't know what those are.
Okay, so 4 is the individualist artist who's like very introspective and fundamentally feels like unique and special, but also kind of mysteriously flawed. And like the biggest fear is being seen as a normie and like overlooked. And so you dress like this and try to stand out and like do crazy things and defy typicalness. And I'm solidly a 4, no question. A 3 is defined by ambition and achievement, and kind of feels like their worth depends on how much they accomplish and how much like status and like topness they rack up. And so I think like in terms of self-diagnosis, a lot of it comes down to not how you necessarily manifest in actions, but what the motivations are and what the wounds are. Like what are you trying to compensate for and how are you trying to do it versus, what does it look like?
Right.
Yeah.
And is the 8 driven by like a safety thing?
The 8 is driven by a sense of, well, I don't want to say driven by, but an 8's biggest concern or biggest thing that they want to prevent is being betrayed. So they want to be in control of situations. They want to take control of groups, and like they're kind of like snow plows. They could have tons of energy that they can just like bust through stuff. But if they're in a bad place, all that power will be misused and hurt people. So if they're in a good place, they'll be using all that power to protect people and correct injustice
Right.
and be of service in that way.
Yeah, I relate to those. Yeah, what's the? Oh, let me self-diagnose real quick.
Sure.
I can see it in different ways. There's part of me that definitely relates to what you said about the three, about achievement, and like, but it comes across in a weird way. And I don't know if this is cope or if this is actually extreme arrogance, but I want to achieve according to the standard of the greats of history, and like.
No, I'm nodding because I love this to death. This is my favorite thing ever. And I keep meeting people who are saying things like this. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm getting hyped about it.
I mean, that I was reading recently a selection from the Records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian, is a Chinese historian, like 300 BC, or maybe it was 100 something BC, but around that time, kind of Roman Republic sort of era, but in China. And he's just talking about these sages and like sort of comparing their virtues and like describing what they did. And this one had this quality and that one had that quality. And like, you'll get these sages who would like, they would correct the behavior of the emperor and like risk harm to themselves by doing so. But then because they conveyed it in like the upstanding and virtuous way, the emperor saw that it was actually beneficial and rewarded them with lands and gold or whatever. It's like a lot of stories like that. And, but yeah, and one of them, it's like this guy, it's like, this is like both, it's both the cope and the arrogance. It's like this guy is just talking about how he's just mega underrated. And he's just like walking, and it's like, I think he just was like kicked out of power because like he was slandered in front of the like powerful dude. And he's just like talking about how underrated he is. And then he jumps in a river and dies. And then like Sima Qian reflects that like, he was extremely honorable and that like he would die for this purpose, like shows some dedication to blah, blah, blah. And it's like both arrogant and it's like butthurt. It's like, I do kind of relate to that. And
yes,
but also I am consoled by sort of Chinese philosophy and history in particular, because there's all this, in times when the kingdom is righteous, it is good to be honored. But in times when the kingdom is unrighteous, it is actually bad to be honored. And there's part of me that sees myself in that scale. I'm like, I will get what's coming to me, and it may be 300 years from now. That's my view.
No, I dig this. I dig this super hard. By the way, killing yourself because you feel you're underrated is major form.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Why is he getting all the credit? I deserve it. I'm going to kill myself in a tantrum of, virtue.
Right.
Yeah.
The rage quit.
That's very like, yes, exactly. It's like a very whiny artist kind of thing to do. And what was the other thing? Right. Okay. So when the times are righteous, it's good to be honored, and when the times are unrighteous, it's bad to be honored. I think that's awesome, and it kind of jives with this concept I've been toying with lately about going down to greatness. Like it was a Christian book I read this in. It was saying that Jesus Christ went down to greatness. He was God and he became man, which like to imagine is kind of like us becoming a goldfish
right.
to like teach the other goldfish what virtuous living is. It's just like such a demotion as to be incomprehensible. And then even among humans, he would, befriend the poor and the sinners and the prostitutes and die a thief's death, like that. The endeavor to go down, and he who humbles himself will be exhausted. But then later exalted. He who humbles himself will be exalted. And when I have to confess to having spent my whole life like trying to become cool because I see all these cool people that I feel like I'm better than,
Mhm.
and it's just like, how dare you? You know, like where's my credit? And at the same time, um, there's this kind of wide open playing field in the downward direction. Like you can kind of potentially like lame max or uncool max in order to stake a claim on this territory that everyone maybe kind of secretly wants to go to, but they're afraid because it's not
Interesting.
cool. And I suspect that there's just kind of like a gold mine of something there.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that the um, one thing I've had to internalize, and I'm still internalizing, is that you get nowhere by trying to be something that you're not. Um, but there's like a hair's breadth of like subtlety that's important there, where it's like striving to change is a different thing than trying to be something that you're not, and they sound like this. They
Yeah,
sound like the same, but they're different. And part of how I try
yeah,
to thread it is that um, you want to, you think you have many choices. You don't. There's one thing that you can be, and that is yourself, and it is the best version of you. And part of it is like with this art stuff, there's a way. I've definitely had these thoughts and like, these conversations with God where it's like, I didn't want to be an artist. I might not even be one. Like I may be someone who, I mean, I am making stuff and like it's a video and like blah blah blah. But it's like I don't know where I'm going. I'm doing this because this is what I have to do. It's just there is no other path, and that's the thing that artist kind of person says, I guess. Also, so there's that. But it's like I just feel like I am trying to turn a. I'm trying to put spirit into matter. And for now, I'm doing it with video, right? And it's like, but I could have been, I would have been a fucking, I don't know, like be a military guy. That sounds fucking cool. Or like, I would have been like fucking like Jeff Bezos, like with like building like the mega infrastructure thing. Like that sounds fucking awesome. Those guys seem to get richer, like, like blah, blah, blah. But it's just, you try to be, you try to spawn as a different type and it's like too late for that. It's like, it's not to say you don't have any. I don't know. I sort of think people don't really have choice, like that there's an illusion of choice. You have choice about things like career. You have choice about like how you pursue it. But it's if you're trying to become the greatest version of you, it's like you need to obey the signs you're getting. Is how I think about it.
yeah, yeah. I think that's paradoxically very liberating, and like I don't want people to listening to this think like, oh, that means you're doomed or whatever. But like the way in which you can have everything you want is kind of only one particular way, and all you can do is get closer to that one thing. But it's not to say that anything is necessarily off limits, but that the form that the satisfaction of it takes is kind of maybe predetermined in a
Right.
certain
It's like,
sense. Because there's a difference. Yeah.
so, yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say that it can feel if it
Yeah.
feels confining. Um, Somehow that's where freedom comes from. Somehow freedom comes out of it. Right.
Yes. Yeah. And honestly, I love this, and I'm going to be like reflecting on this for a little while because I've I've often felt paralyzed by
Mm.
choice, by by the appearance of just millions of decisions. And it's one of the reasons I ended up building Ideamarket was I've kind of unconsciously been thinking about choice in terms of
Mm.
ROI. What's really worth doing? What's really worth thinking about? What's really worth XYZ? Because I've had a hard time coming up with any answer that's more more worthy than that question, because I keep just discovering deeper layers and going, there's literally nothing worth doing more than sitting on this couch asking what's worth doing. And at the same time, you have to do something. Um, but I'm getting a little off track here. The notion of like having a soul, like you're here for to be the unique thing that you are. And of all the advice flying around in the world and all the role models flying around in the world, not all of it is going to be a fit. Like you have to find the things that fit well for you. Like
Yeah.
you inevitably have a style, you inevitably have an architecture. And yeah, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I have a yeah, I think like archetypes can be valuable. Like one thought I have that is like part of what has alleviated some of the pressure for me is that I've been very focused on like how do I achieve success, but I'm starting to think that it doesn't matter what you do as long as you do it extremely well. And it's sort of people will be like, oh, well, I'm like, you know, you need to make sure that you're doing the thing that you're truly best at, though, and that's part of it. And it's like people are like, oh, I'm only good at like, you know, playing video games, or I'm only like traveling, or like I only like traveling. You can't like make money on that. But like, first of all, there are people who have become like mega Twitch streamers on videos, and there are fucking travel bloggers who are like bringing some insight or blah blah. People are usually saying that because they haven't really found the hint of like what it would be really drawing them forward. But like those specific things, just if you did them extremely well, like there is a way, like there is something there. The other concept I've been throwing around, like for myself, is of, and here I will articulate it publicly for the first time, of significance density. And so think about like you have a crush on somebody, right? And the littlest thing they do means so much to you, right? A little look. Did they leave the door open? Like, when did they text you? Like, but objectively, this isn't sort of, if you take some kind of stripped of all meaning objective thing, it's just like a mote of dust in time or whatever. Like everything is like, it doesn't matter. But what I noticed, like when I made habits, is like, again, like zooming out, I'm like, better things have been made. I've seen better movies. Like I've like listened to better music, like whatever. But nevertheless, it felt so important to me to make that thing. And that's the sign that that's what I should be doing. It's just that it had the significance destiny is like, you know, the topography is just like whoop. And it's like, I just need to keep hammering the things that have that character, because it, in a way, it doesn't fucking matter how anybody responds. It's just like, that's where it feels right. You know? So that's one of the signs, I think,
I love it.
of the archetype or the direction. So I think about it.
I love it. I love it. Significance density. What kind of observations did you make? How did you notice this topography in your own work?
Well, because it's like I spend a lot of time being anxious about doing something that's important or matters. But then when I do something that actually seems to move me forward, it doesn't come from in a way, it comes from the obsession about doing what's important, but it's not like, it's taking my perspective rather than the world's perspective or some ideal perspective, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel at all like the thing that feels most significant to you a little bit defies logic or common sense with respect to significance?
Yes. And also, the logic and common sense is also part of me and matters. And I try to give that enough attention too. It's not just like jump and see if you can fly, but there's some of that. But there's it's both, but it's both. Definitely including the defying logic part, though. Definitely including that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I asked because I've been feeling the same way. Like, Ideamarket in its ideal end state could be like this information distribution thing that, you know, is really impactful. But I think my significance density is actually highest in making music. And like how the mind goes, how can I possibly write a song good enough to be worth spending less time building the epistemic infrastructure of humanity, or so I tell myself. But yet there's this feeling.
I mean, here, I'll give you some Chinese philosophy.
Oh boy.
this is from Mencius, and I don't remember the names of the characters, but the format of these is usually King something asked Mencius a question, and Mencius said blah blah blah, right? So it'll be like King Wen of Hui or something like that. So let's just say that that's what it is. So King Wen of Hui asked Mencius, "I want to be a good king, but I am too in love with art. I'm too in love with beautiful things and walking in the gardens and etc. And I fear that this will take me off the path of being a virtuous king." And Mencius said, if you were to share, well, Mencius tells a parable. I'm going to give the complicated version. Mencius tells a parable here about a different king. And he talks about these two different kings, right? There's one who has a small garden, right? And he was killed. He was assassinated because he was a bad ruler. The other one had an enormous garden, but he invited people in to walk in the garden and to do recreation and to like be by the pond with their families and stuff like that. So he says, if you would share your love of the good, right, which comes across as the love of poetry and the love of music and the love of art and love of walking in the beautiful places, if you would share that with the people, then they would want you to love it even more. And take what you will from that.
I will certainly. Thank you. That's cool. I dig it. I feel
Mencius is great.
And I think it segues a little bit to something else that I wanted to ask you about. When I was visiting you, you showed me a couple books that were like firsthand accounts of history. One was, I think it was Napoleon's personal writings about some of his travels, and then some writings from, if I remember correctly, like some conquistadors encountering Aztecs and
Yes.
stuff for the first time. And then everything you're discussing here with Chinese philosophy, I get the sense that you get a lot out of these firsthand descriptions from brilliant people who are just like super different and from another time and just like had their own kind of thing. I just want to like mine that and get the Cliff's Notes, since I don't have the, if I had 3 extra lifetimes, I would read that stuff, but I just don't. So like, give me the IV drip. Like I want it. Well, what do you got?
Well, I will just say, if you ever read a book again, you just choose well, and you may find some of these at nearer the top of your list than you think. So the 2 books you're mentioning are The Corsican is a selection of like Napoleon's writings and journal stuff. I've only found copies of it on eBay. I'm almost loath to mention it because I don't know how many copies there are, but it's fucking awesome. All the copies I've gotten are like from 1920, and they've got these yellow pages and stuff. And they're beautiful. The other book is The Conquest of New Spain by Bernal Diaz, who traveled with Cortez in the 1400s to the New World to conquer the New World. What do I get? But the latter one just reads like an adventure book. So I'm saying, like, if you would ever just like pick up a fiction book, consider The Conquest of New Spain, because it's not fiction. And it's awesome. It's just like action packed basically. And like, okay, there's a couple sections where they go on for too long about how much flour they brought on the boats, but like, you can get where you're going.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, let me just look up the Dirge for Janus on the Funeral Plane. You read Dune?
No, but I just saw the movie,
Right.
and let all the scoffs rain down on me. But I really liked it.
The movie will bring people into watching the thing. My internet is crappy right now. For some reason, Google Chrome wants to use Yahoo, which is truly insane. There's this little tidbit in Dune, which is like at the beginning of the chapters they have these like sayings and stuff, and from that world, right? And so one of these is this. This dirge for Janus, which he's a character, and it's sort of regretting that this person, his life was stolen away and passed away from him because he spent it in confusion. He spent it, looking at shadows, like grasping at absent things. And is this showing up yet? No, sorry. The reason I mention that is because that's what freaks me out, is like letting my life pass away, and like habits is kind of about that, right? It's just like letting it slip away. It's like the only thing you get, as far as I know, right? maybe there's a cool afterlife. That would be cool. Not going to bank on it, but that would be cool. I like to read history because it's a great like illusion breaker. Because it's like, I think your time is one of the sources of illusion. Is like your era is one of the sources of illusion. So you look out from the eyes of a person at a totally different time with very different assumptions and very different like cultural baggage and very different notions of like what it means to be good and notions of like how a person would conduct themselves and etc. And you have, through the empathy, you can sort of like, I hope to sort of shed some of any of the confusion that my era is putting on me. And that's kind of the reason. And also part of it with someone like Napoleon is just that, like, you know, he's a high achiever. So you want to know what made him tick, essentially. It's also very entertaining because he's such a fucking character. He's just like talking about how, like, as a boy, no one really liked him and they found him dry. And like, you know, and like, all I care about is my work. And then he like writes these like letters to his wife and he's like, you scorn me with your marble look and your cold stare. And like, and you're like, it's just, there's something that I just find joyful in it because he's such a character. The Aztec one is just because the Aztecs are maybe the most alien civilization that we know a little bit about, because they're so different from us, like all the human sacrifice and towers of skulls and cannibalism, and it's like same species, different people. And like we could be doing that. That's part of it. We could be just like that. We happen to not be. Why?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, in order to pass off as like we just abstract that a bunch of layers into rituals and things
Right.
like that. Yeah, no, I'm really into it, and like I have read not so much history, but just books written by geniuses of ages past. Mm-hmm. William James is a favorite. Right. I read Augustine. I started Augustine at in Utah, and there's this sense like when you read something like that that's really good, it almost is like reading their Twitter feed. It's like they're around now and they just have this totally different kind of take on things, and it can kind of bake into you and be really kind of foreign, and it's super cool.
Yeah, it's a joy. I mean, I and sometimes I find that they're more relatable than people I know, like in some weird way, on some weird, narrow but essential dimension. I'll sometimes feel more for.
Yeah. Who are some of those people that make you feel seen?
You'll find I know some people kind of like this, but one is what we've talked a bit about Saint Ignatius. Because Saint Ignatius, in addition to being a saint and like a founder of a whole sub thing of Christianity, is a mind guy. He's a mind guy, and he describes in the spiritual exercises that you will imagine, the site of the Garden of Eden and all these things that are going on there. And he repeats, and I say, like in the vision of the mind, you will see these things. And he's saying that you will visualize them. He's given the specific instruction. You will imagine the sights of hell and all the burning fire and its total expanse and how enormous it is, and the howls of profanity and the sound of beasts and the smells of hell and the smoke and the sulfur and the acrid stench of blah blah. And he's like, he's trying to get you to do a thing with your mind in order to cause a change, and that is like, that's my shit. Like, that's your shit. Like, it's
very phenomenological, very artistic. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
that's cool. About like imputing an experience.
Yeah. And I might have. I might have mentioned
that.
this to you in person, but it's also that I just find relatable that he has these things that are like, it's not just crazy esotericism. It's like normal self-improvement advice. And he says, don't just pray for an hour, pray for a little longer than an hour to make sure you pray for an hour. And you could hear Tim Ferriss, just fucking Cal Newport, saying that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
He says, after you pray, if it went well, reflect on why and endeavor to do that more in the future. And if it went poorly,
that is very Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, it's like iterate, like, like go meta, like learn lessons about the process and improve it. Like, so
yeah. I mean, that's super rational. Maybe you have advice for me on this. That's super rational and like sounds like a completely reasonable habit to have. But I like my chaos so much, and I'm afraid that if I start trying to like have really good habits, I'll realize just how bad my habits are and just how high that mountain is. Like I'm afraid to start climbing the mountain of improving habits because it might be infinity feet tall.
It's tall. It's very tall. I mean, honor that too. I think like, maybe there are problems that you need to slowly sidle up to. In order to, maybe you need to prepare, you know what I mean? Maybe you need to question how you would go about it before you just force yourself into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's that. I think it's like not wanting to impose a structure that isn't actually there. Kind of like going back to we don't have choices thing. Like I could try to put on Tim Ferriss and I could do it for about a day. Other than that, it's just like taking heuristics and using it to filter stuff so that I can do less work.
Yeah, I mean there's intelligence in like in these aversions. I
like that. Yeah, I like that. What kind of art, film, etc. can we expect in your near future potentially?
Good question. I am trying to figure out how to fund what I'm doing, and I may be trying to raise money to do a project that I will post online soon. I also might just keep going on the short films thing, and I guess I don't like talking about stuff before it's ready because I change my mind all the time.
By all means, I completely understand that. So don't push it just because I asked. But I will say, like when you posted your like website updates or something like that recently, I read some of your old stuff and really liked it. So I hope maybe you'll do like a Substack a little bit, and you can share. You can attach videos to Substack posts. You can like distribute that however you want.
I would.
Yeah, man. Just like
I would say if there's something coming, that's it. That I'm gonna keep trying to make stuff that was doper than what I made before. I'm gonna keep trying to hit timeless themes and with historical, spiritual, mythological significance.
Awesome. I have one more question. How did you become an in-group pope?
The Sravaka made a bracket, and there were 12 people in the bracket.
I know you became because you won the vote because like you got elected. But how did you win the vote?
Yes.
It's kind of like, the one impossible thing to do is say, I am going to be cool. And then be cool. That's like...
That's right. It is cool to be in group.
Yeah. So, right. Exactly. And like, but to call your shot is it's like that. Nothing kills cool faster than calling.
I'm going to be honest. I think I just went harder than everyone else. I think it's with the media stuff. I need to upload these to YouTube, but it was the videos I made. I don't know if you ever saw my in-group pope video.
Maybe like the day it happened before I really knew you, but
I made a bunch of it. I made 2 like advertising me videos, and every day I was doing like recap of the previous day. Here's what's coming next. Here's my read on the bracket, and then I would like tell everybody to vote for me and shit. There was a lot of insanity with that. There are confirmed cases of like vote buying happening, and just people doing like wild shit. I do give Connor some credit here, where he was just like, you got to go hard, like. Don't half-ass it. Like if you're going to do it, like go hard. And like that did cause me to make a funnier video than I would have otherwise.
That is pretty funny. I feel, a gentle cloud of conclusion maybe settling. So I think I'll, kind of we'll leave it here. And I'm going to share links to a bunch of your stuff in the about for this
Sweet.
episode. And just want to say thanks so much for the time and hang out. It's been super fun. If there's anything else you'd like to add, now's the time. We got.
No, I mean, this is great. Thanks for having me. Let me know if I can help you find any links. No, sounds good. Good chat.
Sounds good, man. Excellent. Likewise. I'm just going to hit